Hello, I'm Sam Lloyd, priest in charge of Trinity Church, Boston. Welcome to a year of the Bible. The following presentation is part of an adventure our parish is taking together to explore the Hebrew Scriptures, the foundational stories of our faith, and to wrestle with the great mysteries of God, life, love, and justice. We're delighted to have you join us. The Jacob's saga. Rarely will you meet a scoundrel as horrendous as Jacob. Rarely will you encounter someone who is quite as conniving, manipulating, sneaky, betraying as one of our forebears, one of our models for family values in the Bible. So the ironies are many. And not just the ironies of, boy, weren't these complicated, dreadful people, but why did they choose to tell these stories? What made them, we are not yet into history. We're back right there at the edge between myth and memory and storytelling around the campfire and the very beginnings of history. And somehow, clearly there are some strands of memory in these stories that have been told time and time again. But the fascinating question is, why didn't, okay, I won't say it. Don't go there. Why didn't they clean it up? You know, that is a real source of fascination and by my light, a source of beguilement and interest, that we're getting something that goes very deep in a lot of memory and a lot of probing and a lot of storytelling. It represents something deep in their sense of who God is and who they are and what kind of people that they're meant to be. I have about 6 stops along the way I want to make in a fairly brief amount of time. Let me say just a couple of things. Is this working okay? A couple of things in general. No, not so well. Max, could we kick it up a bit? Let's see. Let's see. Steve, would you go try to find Max and get him to turn the volume up a bit? Up a bit, yes. Thank you. But not too much. Here we are with... That sounds much better. Thank you. Here we are with 3 roughly analogous stories being told in this piece of Genesis. The story of Abraham and Sarah, we heard a great deal about, and Bill talked beautifully about their sense of call, their long journey, the complexities of their life. And then they have their son Isaac. And of course, the last part of Abraham and Sarah's story is the sacrifice of Isaac. Abraham takes Isaac and puts him on a sacrificial platform prepared to knife him to death. And then God calls it off for all the mysterious reasons. Isaac married Rebekah, and then the children, and then their child was Jacob, and then Esau. So we're getting parallel stories. In each of the generations, there are problems with barrenness, the old word for women not being able to bear children, and yet somehow God seems to make a decision to work through some piece of that family, and lo and behold, clearly part of what's being said is humans aren't bringing children into the world. God is deciding who's to come into the world and how it works. One of the striking things about this whole narrative is you can't figure out why in the world God in this story is doing these things. At the end of the day, why would God work with Jacob? I mean, even if God wanted to make a point that I can work through everything, like some preachers try to make it, why would God choose somebody so scandalous? And why would God somehow keep trying with Jacob. These two powerful encounters that Jacob has with God along the way. And the answer is we don't know. What we know is somehow in the memory and somehow in trusting this scriptural story, people have trusted that somehow God went that out of the way with that unlikely a person to be a channel for ultimately the redemption of the world, as the story will unfold. And we can keep asking those questions about just why exactly that is. When we get to the story of Jacob and Rachel and Rebekah, we're now pretty close to sort of novelistic telling with motivation and feeling. The others are a little bit abstract, but now we're really getting into pretty rich stories and pretty rich maneuvering. So let's jump in. I want to say some things about each of these steps along the way. The first one is we begin to learn early on at the very beginning that we're in for this fascinating story, because we learn from the story of Jacob's birth that, number one, Rebekah had not been able to have children, and finally she did. Then Isaac prayed, and God decided to have children. But there was this fascinating, and if you look at it on the page, fascinating oracle, this mysterious voice from God saying, 2 nations are in your womb, and the 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mammal, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel. That would be our friend. So he was named Jacob, which means the usurper. One of the things I want to point out is in the womb, 2 peoples are born. Buried in these stories is all the way through is somehow through in this historically hard to sort out set of families. What belongs definitely on the side of historical memory is there were 12 tribes of Israel. So we're working down from Abraham to Isaac and Rebekah to Jacob and Rebekah and Leah, who become, with the help of a couple of handmaidens, the mothers and fathers of the whole of all the 12 tribes of Israel. And in a way, there's something about the tension between Jacob and Esau that is a memory of the tensions between the tribes, 2 tribes bumping up, the tribe of Esau and the tribe that Jacob was a part of. So all that's part of the background. But the fascinating thing is we're hearing a story about in the womb, the competition has already started. And in the womb, we have 2 distinctly different personalities already being evident. 2 very, very different people. Esau is the athletic one, the stronger one, the younger one, red, and a big red hairy body. He's an outdoorsman. He's a go-getter. He's a hard charger. He's very much his father's son. Isaac was basically a prosperous, successful head of his tribe and of his people. And this is the successful, kind of outgoing, not particularly reflective son who is supposed to be the oldest and supposed to get the privileged good things. And then along comes Jacob, just a little bit behind, very different. Jacob is an introvert, it seems. He seems to be more of an intellectual. He seems to have a sort of a conniving temperament about himself. Totally different from Esau. And Jacob, from the womb, is determined to claim a blessing for himself. Now, one of the ironies is that in the course of Jacob's coming into the world, you hear, the elder shall serve the younger. In other words, from the very beginning of the story, Jacob would have known that he is the chosen one. but he refuses to let God work out how that's going to happen. And at every step of the way, he's trying to claim something that he's always been promised he's going to get, and make it work on his terms. Sound familiar in a world like ours? So Jacob goes to work on the way out of the womb, grabbing onto the heel of Esau, in a very vivid image, and coming into the world and already stepping into the world and beginning to grow up. The tension is there, this extrovert, outgoing, happy-go-lucky, positive guy, and this introvert, brooding, conniving, wanting to claim his blessing on his terms, Jacob. Those are our two characters. Next story. Jacob buys the birthright from Esau. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I'm famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die, so what good is a birthright?" We're learning Esau's probably not so bright either. Maybe the frontal lobe hasn't closed yet, and you can't quite think forward. Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore and sold his birthright to Jacob. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So here in this phase 2, you have Jacob willing to pull some tricks to get the birthright for himself. Again, a picture of somebody always on the move, conniving, and Esau a little clueless, a little on the edges, not quite knowing what to make of it all, and finding himself pushed to the side. So let's go to well, we'll just linger. Some questions come up in these stories that makes you want to try to figure out what God is up to. Why was, for example, in the story of Cain and Abel, there was a subtle thing that said Abel's offering wasn't acceptable to God, and we don't know why that is. Or what was there about Isaac that made him preferable to Ishmael in the last go-round? Why should Esau, who is, by the way, by far the more likable character, be ousted in favor of this devious and deceitful Jacob? Well, we don't have answers to those, but those are questions kind of lingering in the air. And it makes you wonder in the narrator, the telling of the story, does the narrator approve of this, or the narrator grieving it? It's hard to figure out what the story is trying to tell us, except for now it's reporting it piece by ugly piece. So the next event is I think the ugliest one of all, which is Jacob's deceit in obtaining Isaac's blessing. I forgot to copy this one, so I will tell you enough of the story. You all, if you have it, it's chapter 27 in your Bible. Are you bringing your Bible? That's the book for me. I stand on the honor of the right hand of God, Bible. Shall we learn that for next go round? Chapter 27. Deeper into the course, we're going to try memorizing the books of the Bible, but we're going easy on you here. So when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son," then he says, it's time for me to bless you, basically. "Prepare the food, prepare the feast, and I will bless you." Now, this is fascinating. Now, Rebekah, who is as bad a conniver as Jacob, this is the mother of these two children. Now, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his own son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me the game and prepare the meal.' Now, therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you." This is kind of Lady Macbeth in the corner of talking. "Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids. Wants to get the fur to cover him, so that when he goes in when Jacob goes in, that Isaac will think that is Esau then in there with him." So Jacob said to his, and Jacob actually says, "Mother, my brother Esau is a hairy man and I'm a smooth skin. How's that going to work?" And then Rebekah says, "Well, just do it." He said, "But it's not going to work." And then Rebekah says, Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word and go and get them for me. Means she's willing to have the curse come on her. This is a determined mother who has a clear sense of how things ought to work out for her children, and particularly for the favorite child. And so all gets prepared, and Jacob goes in, and we have it played out. So he went into his father and said, "My father," and he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son? I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done what you told me." So it goes on down. He answered, but Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? Found the game to come in?" He says, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." So now he's blaspheming. He's putting God on his side in finding the game and coming in to prepare the food. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son or Esau." So Jacob went up to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice. But the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother's, and so he blessed him. And he said, "Are you really my son, Esau?" Jacob answered, "I am." Then he said, Bring it to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it, and he was blessed. And then, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of his father, his brother Esau came in from hunting, jolly, ready to go get his blessing. He also prepared savory food to take to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father sit up and eat of his son's game so that you may bless me." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" "I am your firstborn son Esau." Then Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all? Before you came I have blessed, yes, and blessed he shall be." When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me also, father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing, for he has supplanted." And then Jacob says, "He has supplanted me." So the fury breaks loose. Esau is both heartbroken and enraged. He feels terrible, and the only thing he can imagine to do is try to kill his brother. So Jacob gets word that Esau is a little unhappy with what's happened. And here you are, another brother getting ready to kill a brother. So what does Jacob do? He skips town. Much of the story of Jacob is his running away from people who are after him, the terrible things that he's been doing. And so he travels as hard and fast as he can, and arrives at one of the two great moments of encounter with God. And they are both on your sheet. So let's take a look. So Jacob has been running away in terror, dashing as fast as he can, heading away to another place, another town, a place where he can settle and try to avoid what his brother wants to do to him. And lo and behold, there along the way, this remarkable moment happened. These two stories are two of the great key stories of the Old Testament, our Hebrew Scriptures, two riveting stories of encounters with God. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him. Here's the Lord standing right by Jacob. We don't quite know what that would mean or feel like, but it's something. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you, and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed wherever in you, and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised." Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said these famous great words, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the great gate of heaven." Those, by the way, are great words inscribed in many churches and many cathedrals. Surely the Lord is in this place. How awesome is this place! None other than the house of God and the gate of heaven. But what do we make of this moment? I suppose one place to begin is, isn't God being a little excessively gracious with his man? I mean, this is no little, you've really messed up, but if you'll straighten up and fly right, we can get on with it. This is pouring blessing upon blessing, the promise of land, the promise of posterity, the promise that I will go with you wherever you go. What a huge declaration this is. What possibly could be behind this? I don't have, obviously, an answer to this. And we don't know enough about where it came from. But in a little while, in just a few minutes from now, Jacob the usurper, Jacob the manipulator and the trickster will acquire a new name, which is Israel. Pretty soon he will acquire the name that will be the name of a people that has had, could say, a spotty past and has a spotty past ahead. Has seen terrible things, probably known it has done terrible things, expects that there will be terrible and hard things ahead. We have to look at today. But somehow having some conviction that is horrendous as their founding parent could be, as horrendous as things can be for them as a people, for some reason, God wants to work through them. Along the way, in our journey, we will spend some time with what theologians call the scandal of particularity. The strange claim that emerges in our scriptures, both in the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, that God loves the whole world, the whole human race, but God chose a people to go to work with, to try to help them to get it right as signs of how the human race is meant to be. This isn't the moment to think about that theologically or whether it makes sense in our kind of world, but it is an underlying piece of this story, that this story has been compiled and nurtured and held on to for all of the shadiness and complexity and troublingness of it, reflecting the conviction that God decided, okay, I'm going to put my chips here, to stay inside the sort of mythological language. God has decided, I'm going to put my chips here. These are going to be my people, and we're going to go to work. And in some way, in ways more mysterious than that, that continues to be both the Jewish conviction, and as the Hebrew people become, their agenda gets picked up by the Christian community, Christians seeing themselves as the ones called to take the Jewish faith out to the whole world, to the Gentile world. The vision was, we are a called people, in spite of our flaws, in spite of our failures, to be used by God to build, to contribute to the building of a world of hope and peace and decency and justice in our world. So some of the best that I can make of this, and we have to probably save till Wednesday night to really explore this some more. So the best I can make of this is that this is in a way part of their core faith story, that they have these manipulators as part of their identity, and yet God has chosen to work with them and bless them. Now, you would think that after this one, this encounter with God, and then after the other encounter with God, Jacob would be humbled and honored and grateful for what has happened for him. Not a bit. He's a retrograde all the way. So we'll see some pieces of that. So it is a fascinating exploration of the mysterious purposes of God. How do we measure how God works and why God chooses to engage some ways and some people, and why do even people who seem to be blessed and have good things turn out to be such scoundrels? We're not getting a nice little, there's a good world, there's a world where good people are rewarded and bad people are treated badly. It's a world where it's all mixed up, like our world, but with their conviction that God, this God of grace and mercy, works through even these kinds of characters. If you come Wednesday evening, we'll also sing "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder," which is the great song. I was going to sing it today, but we don't have the time. But this great, lovely, haunting African-American melody of climbing up. We are climbing Jacob's ladder, children of the cross, the soldiers of the cross. So that first great encounter happened. That sort of encounter with God that we go back to again and again. The sense that we human beings who think we are so far from God, what this story is about is out there in the rocky outdoors. He puts his head on a pillow, has a dream, and finds that he is having a vision of the Holy One, God's own self, and is being drawn into encounter with that. A way of saying that any place can be a holy place. Any place can be what we could say a Bethel, a place where God can come to us. So Jacob moves on from there. He goes to live with Laban. We could spend a whole session on the adventures with Laban. He falls madly in love with Rachel. And if you remember the basic outlines of the story, it's described in beautiful language. First sight of Rachel, he is just utterly swept away, speechless with her beauty, speechless that that's who she's meant to be. Immediately Jacob wants to marry her, begins to talk to his uncle Laban about that marriage. Laban is a very shrewd fellow himself and tells Jacob, sure, but first you've got to work 7 years. Stay there and work 7 years, and then after that you can have Rachel. Well, Jacob works the 7 years, and at the end there is a celebration and a great wedding night, and the wedding night takes place, the celebration takes place apparently in pitch black dark. And so when Jacob wakes up the next morning, he realizes that he's married Leah, the sister, who apparently is not the pretty one. And I think Laban thought he needed to address that problem first, and did. Jacob was unhappy with this, but he turns on a dime and says, well, okay, how can I get Rachel too? And Laban said, well, that will be 7 more years. So he makes a home with Laban for another 7 years, gets Rachel, has 2 wives. They begin having children who become the mothers of the different tribes of Israel. I think they get a little tired of having children. They bring in 2, as we say, handmaidens to produce more, so they get pretty much up to the 12 tribes, of which one will be the tribe of Joseph, whom we're turning to next week. That's how it all gets linked. Turns out, as Jacob is living there with Laban, Jacob learns how to feather his nest or build up his own resources. There are lots of different herds of cattle, and it's not portrayed clearly in the story, but slowly Jacob starts stealing from Laban, accumulating his own stuff. And that builds up more and more, and finally he gets word that Laban's unhappy, and he decides it's time to go. So he takes the 4 wives, all wives, so to speak, all the children, gets the cattle going as well, and what they call the household gods, and they take off lickety-split, with Laban's coming to kill it. And so again we have our friend on the go, dashing as hard as he can to get away, scared to death he's going to be caught. And he comes to this great moment, the one we heard about, the one we heard in our lesson this morning. I think one of the most mysterious and gripping events anywhere in the Scripture. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob. He struck him on the hip socket. And Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go," and this is the man, "let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name. Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." No one knows exactly what was going on there. All we know is something that seemed like a figure. A lot of thoughts have been this story is meant to be talking about a river demon in the Jabbok, since there were known to be such things. Some people call that an angel. Jacob wrestling with the angel is one of the ways it's talked about. Some embodiment of the divine. It becomes Jacob's moment of encountering his own failure. One of the great, it's a difficult poem where I read it to you, great Jeremiah Hawkins' Poems of Despair is all about wrestling through the night. And the last line is, "And I, wretch, lie wrestling with my God, my God." In other words, realizing in the wrestling that I'm not just wrestling with my guilt or my loneliness or the things that happen. I'm actually wrestling with those things and wrestling with God at the same time. It's a picture of those dark moments when we all get caught and we're in some despair, some struggle, some pain. We're up in the middle of the night. We find ourselves tormented and struggling to find our way through it. And begin to realize this isn't just some small problem. It's ultimately about me. It's ultimately about God. It's ultimately about who I am. So it's this powerful wrestling with who he was and who he had become. A couple of insights in this. One is that there's a lot written and talked about who the man was. There's a lot talked about the limp he gets when you wrestle with God. In this case, the best guess is Jacob is wrestling with his own realization of his terribly flawed life. Being scared to death, he's facing, Laban's coming after him, may kill him. What have I done with my life, is what it seems to be. And it also becomes wrestling with who God has been for him. And so in the wrestling, as he's there doing everything he can, this whole business of name comes up. Tell me your name. And he says, my name is Jacob. A lot of people think that's a moment of confession for him. Jacob's name is that means usurper, trickster, manipulator. When they're in the presence of man, he says, I am Jacob. Many think it's a way of saying, I am the manipulator. I am the trickster. You're now seeing, we've wrestled so far into the night, you're getting the real me. And when that happens, a kind of note of confession, of laying it all on the table, that's when the man says, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans. Will now give you the name that you will carry and your people will carry as someone who has struggled mightily, has been a trickster, but now you can claim that name as someone who has striven with God and walked away with a limp. It's a story about confronting our past. It's a story about confronting our terrible mistakes. It's a story about opening up in the presence of God, who we are, to allow God to come in, to be with us in the darkness. It's a story about putting aside the nice pictures we put on ourselves of who we've been and how we've lived, and actually looking at it and wrestling with it and allowing God to wrestle in it with us. And out of that, God willing, for what the things we have done and been, we can move on, limping, carrying with us the wounds of what's gone before, but also the liberation and freedom to move on from there. A powerful encounter with God for this blasphemer, this cheat, this liar, facing all that at once. I know I should go, but I can't close without. Think about Esau. Poor guy. I mean, it has been awful. Finally, Esau catches up right there at the end. Finally, Jacob is ready, and it's soon after what happened at Peniel. Soon after, he's got to face the encounter has happened, and soon after that, he's ready to make his way, and lo and behold, Esau catches up with him at last. He's been running away from Laban, and now Esau has been after him too, and finally they catch up, and he is ready for Esau to come and probably kill him. Chapter 33, this is. Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on up ahead, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until his brother came near, clearly getting ready to try to apologize for where you begin. But then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. How's that at the end of the story? When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" And they talked. The children whom God has graciously given you, sort of they talk back and forth. And then Esau says, "Well, come on, let's go on together. Let's move forward." And that's too much for Jacob. He says, "No, I can't do that." But then they have one last embrace of farewell and go on their way. That's a little forerunner, I think, of the prodigal son story. The ugliest, worst kind of relationship, the worst kind of behavior possible. And here is one of the great moments of recognition and embrace and forgiveness anywhere in the Scriptures. Esau ran to him, embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. What a great story. Filled with mysteries. Each of these stories can take you lots of places. But an amazing story of a God who works through real characters, and somehow in the midst of this is determined to do the work of leading us all home. Quiet story. Off we go.